having all the fun. I don't mind, I'm still here. Everything seems perfect from down here. That's the reason you still fear. If the screams aren't buried, oh my God, you'll let the echo shake it all apart. I'll tell you a secret, let's make this perfectly clear. There's no secrets this year. I'll tell you a secret, I'll make it perfectly clear. There's no secrets this year. So your heart's blown open, pulsating in your ear. Be sincere. I'll tell you a secret, let's make this perfectly clear. There's no secrets this year. Lay your head down, rest your feet. I'm blowing kisses while you sleep. And when I know you're safe and dreaming, my escape plan divorce me.
Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, October 23rd, 2017. My name is Michael Brooks on a Michael Monday, and this is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industry-ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartlands of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Marshall Steinbaum, research director and fellow at the Roosevelt Institute on the tax debate we need. Hint, it's not about the deficit. Bill O'Reilly, he's doubling down, even though it's come out that there was over a $30 million settlement because of his behavior at Fox. Soldier's widow, soldier of Lieutenant Johnson, says that Trump struggled to remember his name the whole time. Fake news. Even as Trump promises to pay the legal bills of any aides that might find themselves in trouble. Another thing that I wouldn't exactly take his word for. And the U.S. is preparing to put its nuclear bombs back on a 24-hour alert, which they have not been since the Cold War. Great. Tillerson and Mattis to testify in a closed hearing on reauthorization of the AUMF. The deaths in Niger have somewhat intruded back into public consciousness slightly, that we're still fighting a global war based off of a rapidly aging defense authorization. And is the Mueller investigation now putting a Democratic lobbying supergroup in its crosshairs as part of an investigation of Paul Manafort? It's the swamp, folks. It's the swamp. And we can find out, did Lion Ted's dad play a role in the assassination of JFK? Donald Trump's releasing, apparently.
Raphael, what have you been doing?
Raphael. Trump enlists family, cabinet, and Congress in addressing the opioid crisis. And the EPA backs down on a biofuels program. And Catalonia resists new pressure from Spain's prime minister as that situation continues to intensify. Rajoy promising to get rid of regional autonomy there. All that and more on today's Majority Report. Let's start out of the gate with a bit of sound. This is John McCain. I always usually give a caveat. I'm very hard on John McCain, and I think we need to be hard on John McCain for a variety of reasons, from his warmongering to Sarah Palin to his daughter. But that being said, this was a good shot he gave here against Donald Trump, and I say the more of this, the better. Why not? As long as it doesn't allow us to glorify George Bush's and John McCain's. They're awful, or Bob Corker for that matter. But in this context, to undermine Trump and to have a little bit of internal Republican heat, great. Go for it.
Mass arrests, demonstrations, Chicago, that all of us can look back and see on C-SPAN. But it was a tumultuous time, and most of it was bred by the conflict. And one aspect of the conflict, by the way, that I will never, ever countenance is that we drafted the lowest income level of America, and the highest income level found a doctor that would say that they had a bone spur. That is wrong. That is wrong. If we're going to ask every American to serve, every American should serve.
A bone spur. What trust fund baby could John McCain be referencing there? I believe that a certain bloated narcissist, wasn't that the way he got out of Vietnam? Bone spur?
That's correct.
Bone spur. So effective shade there from Senator McCain. And as always, we wish him well in his medical. He's facing something. It's really horrible. Like my understanding is that
there's not a good prognosis.
There's not a way out of that. Really, is my understanding. So that's terrible.
Ted Kennedy had the same.
That was the same. Oh, really? I didn't realize that. Yeah, no, that's really bad. And it's cool that he's going down swinging. Are you hiring? Do you know where to post the job to find the best candidates? We were just hiring, and we found Brendan Patrick. Brendan Patrick O'Malley O'Finnegan. For the ZipRecruiter. He was sitting at home watching Fox News clips, not knowing where to feed them to. He didn't know where to go. And now here he is in our office.
Folks, ZipRecruiter does not include an Irish need not apply.
What if hiring could be easier, more streamlined, and less time consuming? So even when you're busy, you could still find the smart way to go about your hire. If you're hiring, and you know the quality hires keep your business moving forward, you also know it can take a lot of time to find the right candidate for the job. With ZipRecruiter, you can post your job up to over 100 over 100 of the web's leading job boards with just one click. Then ZipRecruiter puts its smart matching technology to work, actively notifying qualified candidates about your job within minutes of posting so you can receive the best possible matches. Like Brendan. Brendan was there, and Brendan was like, what if Steve Ducey's son was sent to Aruba, and he asked somebody a question, and I have a time code for this, but I don't have a job. Ding! Majority Report. Boom. And now he's here making the show better and better. That's why ZipRecruiter is different. Unlike other hiring sites, ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on the right candidate finding you. It finds them. No wonder 80% of employers who post on ZipRecruiter can get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. Boom. No juggling emails or calls to your office. Simply screen, rate, and manage candidate all with one place with ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use dashboard. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by businesses of all sizes and industries to find the most qualified candidates with immediate results. And right now, my listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free. That's right. Free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/majority. That's ZipRecruiter.com/majority. And one time to try it for free, go to ZipRecruiter.com/majority. And you know what, folks? Great candidates are not the only things that we're looking for in our lives. We're all looking for something. For some, it's love. For some, it's a sense of purpose. For others, unforgettable experiences. But for most, it's your keys. Well, with Tracker Pixel, you'll never worry about losing your things again. 8 years ago, Tracker, that's TRACK, capital R, changed everything when they released their first tracking device. Now they've done it again with the all-new Tracker Pixel. Tracker Pixel is the lightest Bluetooth tracking device in the market. Place a Tracker Pixel on whatever you tend to lose, keys, wallets, even your cat. Then when you misplace an item that has a Tracker Pixel attached, use your smartphone and a 90 decibel alert will help find it in seconds. It has powerful LED lights so you can find things in the dark. It will help you find your phone even if it's on silent. Better yet, because Tracker is user as part of the largest crowd locate network in the world. You can locate items from miles away. And thanks to Tracker's 30-day money-back guarantee, you truly have nothing to lose. Go to tracker.com/majority to get 20% off of any order. That's tracker.com/majority for 20% off. Tracker.com/majority. Have you guys ever walked by a newsstand and seen a stunning magazine that makes you want to stop and peek inside or read a headline cover that makes you need to know more?
3 different times.
Next time you do, remember Texture. With the Texture app, not only do you get a peek, you get the whole magazine plus unlimited access to over 200 premium titles like Time, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, and Wired. And right now you can get Texture for free. Just imagine having your favorite magazines and their back issues anytime, anywhere. To start your Texture free trial, go to texture.com/majority. If you choose to continue, podcast listeners will get Texture for just $9.99 a month. That's over 30% off their listed price. There are also great gift options available for the holidays. Go to texture.com/majority to start your free trial today. That's texture.com/majority. Texture.com/majority. So tomorrow on the Michael Brooks Show, Big Wosny Lambre, who is launching his own podcast now. It's finally been announced. He's back, relaunched in L.A. The Basketball Friends is the relaunch version of True Hoop. And then his own show, which is Woz Speaks, which I really like because it's like Mohammed Speaks, the Nation of Islam newspaper. So, and I think it looks like I'll probably be a regular on that show as well. So Woz is going to come in. We have a whole bunch of things to talk about. And opening commentary.
Is Woz in studio?
No, Woz is going to be in L.A.
Oh, okay.
It's going to be our first call.
Gotcha.
But it's tough. We were joking at Woz's going away party. We were both joking about our different shower crying techniques that we were going to have when we're far away from each other. And then Hunter Matz, who co-hosts the Mixed Mental Martial Arts podcast and is a science writer. We're going to talk about IQ mythology and debunk Charles Murray. All that and much, much more. And if you're not a patron of the Michael Brooks Show yet, you just missed the 7th illicit history, which is on Iran's justified paranoia and the ideological and historical origins of the Islamic Republic, and all the way up to the Iran nuclear deal with the P5+1. We're actually today, if you're a subscriber on iTunes to the Michael Brooks Show, we're going to be releasing one of our post-game shows we did with Bree, Joy Gray, which was really funny, and you should check it out.
Just to give you a taste.
Giving you a little bit of a taste. Most of our stuff, though, we're our 742 patrons, who are the best people in the world. They get an we're we're at least 3, maybe even 4 to 1 in terms of patrons to public content. So if you haven't checked it out yet, please do. Really honored by all the positive feedback, and it's a very different show than MR, but very complimentary. So definitely check it out. We will be right back with Marshall Steinbaum from the Roosevelt Institute. We're going to be talking about how to talk about taxes.
To show you hate, run them out of your yard. From them I play bad game, I them a backbiters, hypocritical to sideless. We call them modern day Judas, the spreaders of rumors. Oh, them a backbiters, hypocritical to sideless. We call them modern day Judas, spreaders of rumors. Hey, so why should I be afraid of you when you bleed just like I do. The more you try fight, judge a light keeps shining through. So I've got no time for you, cause in my view you wanna step in on my shoe. You wish you never leave a loo and feel so damn confused. How every day you wake you ache because you know you're fake, and every step you take I bring you closer to your grave. But I am like a column when I easily shake. Me certain say I feel me none of who can't take. We guided by the monster, defender of the faith. Yes, ordained to be great. Oh, them a backbiters, hypocritical, two-sideless. We call them modern day Judas, the spreaders of rumors. Oh, them a backbiters, hypocritical, two-sideless. We call them modern day Judas, spreaders of rumors. But your teeth and tongue gonna let you down. Reward for your words shall be profound. Oh, screw all you want, but go loo and drown. Me slew you like Goliath with a stone from a crown. Not even the dog that beset on the wall of Babylon shall escape in this time. So word to the wise, choose the right side, and down to be hindered by your foolish pride. I said no weapon formed against I and I shall prosper, prosper. So tell me so.
Welcome back to the Majority Report. Michael Brooks. Joining us now is Marshall Steinbaum. He's a research director and fellow at the Roosevelt Institute. Marshall, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Marshall, let's start at the basics. You have a really good piece in the Jacobin, The Tax Debate We Need. What is the purpose of modern Republican tax policy? And I guess let's just take it back to the Reagan era.
My interpretation of what the Republicans and the broad conservative movement have been up to in tax policy over the last 40 or so years has basically been to reconcentrate power in the hands of the wealthy. That is to say, the owners and executives of major corporations and their heirs, and anyone who exerts power over the economy and the other stakeholders in the corporations that they own and run. I think basically what happened was that in the New Deal and in the progressive era, their power was tamed by many policies, but especially by progressive taxation, because as I explained in that piece, if you crank up progressive taxes high enough, you basically make it de facto illegal to be rich. And once it's de facto illegal to be rich, that weakens the bargaining power of the richest stakeholders in society. And so what happened was the United States adopted a strong progressive tax regime, and that had a profound impact on the distribution of power in the economy. It was one that certainly Franklin Roosevelt's political enemies felt acutely and hated him for. And I think that after the New Deal, after the Roosevelt presidency was over, they set about a political and ideological project to restore the world that they had lived in, one in which they exercised more power and one in which progressive taxes were as low as they had been.
Yeah, so we're going to get to that because I think it's important to describe the sort of the ideological scam that goes along with this, just a sort of raw reassertion of elite power with regards to the economy. But elaborate, I mean, when you talk about not allowing people to be rich, and this actually does feed into the mythology, there is a notion that, you know, even amongst the kind of technocratic center, and, you know, in the 90s, the kind of, I mean, the third way sort of politicians that sought to carve out some slight sort of softening of basically extreme income inequality and pretty rapid globalization, but kind of have a couple of areas of slight taxation for wealthy people and slight investments in public services, whether we're talking about Bill Clinton in the United States. And I want to use this quote, even though it's in a British context, but Peter Mandelson, who was an advisor to Tony Blair, he actually said, specifically, he said, we're intensely relaxed about people getting, extremely wealthy, I think was the quote, to paraphrase. So what was it that sort of that Roosevelt and that line of politics understood, that in order to have actually some of the sort of genuine open democracy that everybody valorizes in their, the kind of talk about free speech and having a rational open square and all of the rest of it, that you can't actually credibly make the case that you're having that unless you have a radically evened playing field and massive redistribution of resources. Because if you don't, then all the rest of that is just going to be a smokescreen for like the raw assertion of power. And so what was it that made the New Dealers and Roosevelt get that basic insight that we seem like we've been missing ever since, or at least since the 60s?
I think that's an incredibly revealing quote from Mandelson, and I think it gets right down to the enormous ideological difference between Roosevelt and the political movement that he represented and the sort of centrist third way that Mandelson represents, and that is quite influential here as well as in the UK. And that is to say, why are rich people rich, and by extension, why are poor people poor? The Roosevelt view, the progressive view, the populist view that grew out of the Gilded Age was that by and large, it was because they exploited society to their own benefit, right. Or they had inherited from parents who had done that. Right. And the Mandelson view, on the other hand, I think reflects the kind of technocratic ideology of the current age, which is to say that essentially the economy is a meritocracy. If you're rich, it's because you came up with a brilliant idea or were such a assiduous manager that you were able to contribute and thus were compensated for that enormous contribution to society. And you can see that kind of meritocratic view of how how wealth and income should be allocated in the economy would, I would say, enable a slippery slope back from kind of you could say the technocratic elite centrism that was inaugurated by the Roosevelt age and the New Deal back towards the retrograde ideology of the Gilded Age. That is to say, once we're not going to question anymore why rich people are rich because we assume that it's due to their mastery of the economy to the public benefit, then you excuse one after another of the actions and the exploitations that rich people use to get to where they are and remain there.
So then let's go to the backlash and the sort of counter narrative that starts, it starts to maybe get really put into practice in the 80s with Reagan, but already in the 70s you're seeing at least a sort of neoliberal turn in the Democratic side, and actually an interesting kind of split that Matt Stoller writes about of a kind of even these 70s sort of liberals coming out of the 60s with this intense concern, rightly, about things like the military-industrial complex, and rightly a much greater understanding of the things of the emancipatory movements of social justice, but actually a lot more credulousness about concentrated economic power and inequality in the corporate sector. How does this, let's first start talking about it first from an ideological perspective, and then we'll get into just the kind of raw money of it. What's the counter narrative that starts being built to return us to a Gilded Age, which is essentially what Republican tax policy is?
So I think you can't tell the story without starting with the civil rights movement, but especially with the backlash to the civil rights movement, because what the civil rights movement was, in my interpretation, was the extension of the quasi-social democratic policies of the New Deal to include everyone regardless of race. Right. So what we got out of the New Deal itself in the 30s was a social democratic state, an edifice that served almost exclusively white people. Right. And starting in the 40s, and then especially through Brown v. Board of Ed, and then the what we think of as the high civil rights movement in the early 60s, that grand edifice of the state that had been erected to the benefit of white people in the 30s was gradually expanded to include everyone, regardless of race. Or at least that was
the shifting intention of activists and some policymakers to some degree. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done, and a lot of contradictions. But at the same time, there was a sense that we're shifting.
In economic terms, it's, I would say, not controversial in the sense that things like the black-white employment gap and
Right.
the black-white earnings gap had been basically stagnant from the end of Reconstruction through the 40s, very much including the Progressive Era and the New Deal. That is to
Right.
say, they had not had a discernible impact on racial economic gaps. Starting in the 40s, in my view, the integration of the military-industrial complex and then the military itself were absolutely crucial elements of this.
Right.
That you start to see those gaps closing up through the late 70s, at which point they stopped closing. And what I think the ideological transformation that you were referring to grew out of the backlash to that racial egalitarianism. That is to say, it was enormously threatening to the coalition, what might be called the New Deal Civil Rights Coalition, where it created cleavages within different subsets of that coalition, and I think the right was well positioned to exploit those cleavages. I mean, certainly Richard Nixon was the master of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for instance, in the controversy over school busing, for example, as creating great doubt about the efficacy of the New Deal bureaucratic administrative state that is by design egalitarian, and it comes to be seen as a sort of oppressive force, even when, I think a more enlightened latter-day interpretation of it would be as a liberating force. But
of course,
the
right.
view of the racial hierarchy is that it is zero sum, and that creates the ingredients for a backlash. And I think this was something that the right was well able to take advantage of. Interestingly, I don't think it was really, I think part of the right's own mythology of how they took advantage of this is that they sort of convinced the public that the New Deal had to be rolled back, and that everyone became, the sort of broad swath of the population became followers of Ayn Rand. And that is definitely not true. I think where their success was in convincing the political system that the people, that their constituents, that the electorate had turned against the New Deal and its egalitarian aims, rather than the reality of that being done. So if you look at, for instance,
yeah. No, go ahead.
I mean, so there's interesting work on kind of the mythology of the tax revolt in California. How that was, this what became Prop 13 was kind of the culmination of a decade-long, maybe, series of tax revolts that happened on the local level. That definitely had a racial aspect to them, in the sense that people, mostly white homeowners, were saying, my property taxes are too high, and look, it's funding this kind of out-of-control liberal do-gooder integrationist regime in public education that I want no part of. So there was definitely that to it, but the way it became interpreted in Washington was as a rejection of progressive taxation altogether, which is actually diametrically the opposite of true. I think a better summary of what the ideology of the tax revolt was that is me, middle-class white person's property taxes are too high. Instead, the rich people should be paying for this. And that got reinterpreted in D.C. as a rejection of progressive taxation and the entirety of the sort of aggressive tax and spend federal government.
Was it, though? I mean, because that's the Nixon administration is really interesting with regards to this, because there's kind of three different things happening in some respects. I mean, there's this effort in the 60s to, as you say, I mean, first overturn American apartheid and Jim Crow, and then at the same time also say, if we're going to have some type of, modest social democracy, the delivery has to be for everyone. And so the right sees an opportunity to use racial division to reclaim, traditional Democratic voters in the New Deal coalition. So people like Kevin Phillips, who was an intellectual architect of Nixonism, they're talking about, a coalition of, Southern voters, and they would call them Northern ethnics, like Italian, Irish type of thing, and using a lot of signifiers like law and order, silent majority, that type of thing. Now, the Nixon administration is interesting in that regard because, I mean, as everybody kind of knows, it's become a cliche at this point, and in some ways it was like the sort of domestically, like kind of the last liberal president in some ways, that, we're all Keynesian now, the creation of the EPA, different social investments that administration engaged in. And then there's another track of, the Koch brothers and other, sort of donor-based people dumping money into creating a country of Ayn Rand's, which I agree with you has never been real. But the truth of the matter is, as long as there's, funding available, any idea can seem like it has public presence and credibility. If there's, some weird rich people that are, ready to dump a lot of money behind it. So, but it feels like by the 80s, we get to that fully weaponized point. Like in Nixon, there's a transition of like, let's do racism and social division, but also I think guys like Phillips seem to actually want to preserve some version of the New Deal. And then by the 80s, we're going into even deeper, not only racism, even more enhanced racism than Nixon, arguably. And then we're getting into full laissez-faire, trickle-down mythology. So how does that happen? When does the trickle-down fantasy start? Because it isn't just, in my view, it isn't just that those tax revolts are happening and then Washington's interpreting them. They're wanting to interpret them in a certain way. So that by
I think that is exactly right. I mean, I would say they were paid to interpret them in a certain way.
Exactly.
As to your interpretation of Nixon, I think you're spot on in the sense that the policy legacy of that administration is nothing like what we would consider today to be the Koch brothers' list of legislative fantasies. What I think needs to be understood about him and his politics was that he focused single-mindedly on driving this enormous wedge into the New Deal coalition and breaking it apart, and he was singularly successful in that. In order to do it, in his day, he felt that it was not the time for doctrinaire right-wing policy across the board. That is to say, in order to split the white working class vote, if you want to call it that, from the Democratic Party, you had to make them think they were getting what it was that they liked about the New Deal, which is to say social democracy for white people.
Right.
And so Nixon was not terribly doctrinaire when it came to right-wing dogma. Certainly if you were to, he wasn't like a latter-day Robert Taft or any of the sort of people in the Republican Party who had kind of held up the banner of right-wing opposition to the New Deal right through from the late 30s to the 1960s. He wasn't in that mold. I mean, I would say he was in no mold ideologically, but politically he had the instinct that here was the opportunity. The Civil Rights Movement had created the opportunity to break apart the Democratic coalition, and he would throw everything he had at that at that political imperative. As to how we get from there to Reagan, and what I would say the further development of Republican ideology in a more doctrinaire right-wing direction, I think that, again, as you say, has a lot to do with the kind of billionaire funder interests who created a real political machine behind their vision of what the right-wing politics was supposed to accomplish in this country. So they really saw that they had been, defeated in a grand battle by Roosevelt and by the New Deal, and it was time to kind of get back into the field and undo it. But they never did it in any kind of wholly electoral way, the way that Roosevelt did. I mean, I think this is a sort of fundamental asymmetry in politics between right and left that. The left needs democracy to get what it wants. There is no other way. Right. The right can do with democracy or can do without democracy. I mean, sometimes they can get what they want in democratic context, but they are also very happy to get what they want without it. And I think what we have seen in the ideological evolution of this country kind of shows the full strength of what you can do, just by virtue of this kind of movement operating behind the scenes. Now, to that, I would add one enormous proviso, which kind of gets back to Mandelson. I think a crucial element in the success of the right in this country has been what you might call the capitulation, the ideological capitulation of the left.
Right.
That is to say, Reagan would have been an ideological administration that would have been rolled back had it not ended at the same time as the Cold War ended, and had the left not kind of taken a what I would consider an ultimately self-defeating lesson from that, which is to say that we need to move to the right in order to be politically viable at all. And I think a big part of the move to the right in economic policy was the elevation of like what I would consider technocratic interests within the broad Democratic or left-aligned coalition.
Right.
That is to say, we will turn economic policy over to the credentialed economists,
right.
And they know how to do things. The sort of more populistic, more activist-based economic policy that we ran, say, for instance, in the Great Society and the war on poverty has proven to have failed. So, we can't do any better than letting the economists run things, and that ultimately radically circumscribes the kind of politics that you can engage in on the left, and that is, in fact, the direct point of my Jacobin piece about tax policy.
Right, and just to touch on briefly, really quickly, we'll go through Bush and Clinton and and maybe briefly Obama, but I think that there's an enormous danger and I think a new opportunity now that's reflected in your piece that we'll get to in a couple of minutes. But so yeah, in the Clinton era, Clinton actually does pass a sort of slightly progressive tax package in the beginning of his administration. There's some slight modest increases on the rich, but that's also in conjunction with pushing through NAFTA. It's also framed as, there's a bit of a stimulus, but there's this obsession with deficit cutting and all of macroeconomic policy. There's no labor people at the center of it. It's all handed over to Wall Street people. And by the end of the 1990s, you did have these bubbles and this kind of broader growth generally, and Clinton was willing to fiddle around with the tax code here and there and do these kind of micro redistributions. But the overall picture was, whether it be through massive deregulation of Wall Street, tech bubbles, and sort of incentivizing that top-end growth, that obviously inequality grew and the kind of spoils of that growth period were both not sustainable because they were built on a lot of speculation and bubbles and also not distributed broadly enough across the population. And then in George W. Bush passes this massive package of, sort of takes this kind of bazooka to inequality and to entrenching American oligarchy. And then under Obama, we have this sort of same, we get rescued slightly from a massive economic crisis that's, of course, created by all the Wall Street deregulation and Wall Street's, misbehavior and criminality. And then Obama saves it, does a slight stimulus, but then, essentially kind of back to third way economics, just in the context of a post-crisis and with even less kind of broader cultural or economic cushioning for a broad base of America. Before we get to Trump, is that kind of summary, do you sort of buy that kind of read of Clinton, Bush, Obama?
Yeah, I definitely buy the broad narrative, and I would highlight 2 points that I think you touched on. One is the obsession with deficits and the national debt as being a top national priority. To my mind, that was kind of trauma of the right accusing the Democrats of having been tax and spend or just spend liberals, and so the political strategy on the part of the Democrats was that the best inoculation against that supposedly devastating political attack was to show that no, we are the great stewards of the national budget. We can be trusted in order to, and we won't run up the debt. We won't run up the nation's credit card. We'll run the government like you would run your family, that sort of rhetoric. All of that was a gigantic shell game on the part of the right. My view was that their attacks on the tax and spend Democrats was really a veiled racial attack.
Yep.
That is to say, we have the sort of conflation of black people exercising power with enormous government budgets and out-of-control spending is of long-standing in American political history. That is a huge part of the anti-Reconstruction rhetoric that had great currency in the North during the 1860s and 1870s. But the sort of powers that be in the Democratic Party kind of interpreted it way too narrowly and thought, well, they're saying that we run up the deficit, so let's show the country that we don't run up the deficit.
Right.
And that, of course, exerts a great discipline on what you can actually do when you're in power. But more kind of relevantly to this conversation, it didn't actually solve the political problem. It was a misreading of what the political attack really was and what could possibly have blunted it and turned it back. And yet you got, a great deal of deference paid to the imperative of not increasing the debt too much in both the Clinton and the Obama presidency. And then the other thing I would point to is specifically the erosion of effective taxes on capital. Now the piece. The Jacobin piece talks in general about progressive taxation, but the idea of taxing capital or the income that capital generates is a more specific issue. Now, of course, it's rich people who own things. So anytime you're talking about taxes on capital, you're talking about progressive taxation. But I think you can see in the decisions that were made, certainly in the Clinton administration, and even to a degree in the Obama administration, you can see essentially the Democratic economic policymakers buying into the orthodox economic assumption that taxing capital is bad for the economy. So even as you had statutory increases in the top marginal tax rate under Clinton, you also had the easing up of regulations about which kinds of corporations could classify themselves as pass-through entities for tax purposes. And my political interpretation of that was and is that there is a consensus among elite tax officials and policymakers that there should be no taxes on capital or corporate profits, but you can't actually pass that through the floor of Congress, because saying we're going to eliminate the corporate tax system, or saying that we're going to eliminate taxes on shareholders is obviously going to be politically unpopular. My view would be for good reason, but this consensus would hold that reflects misguided populist beliefs about the economy. So if you can't do that, then the next best thing is to just gut the corporate tax system from the inside using administrative rather than political procedures. All of us who know what we're talking about know that we shouldn't really be taxing these people anyway, so let's just let them get out of paying taxes.
Right.
And I don't think that the Clinton administration's tax policy was, a gigantic conspiracy, and nor was it united behind that particular ideology. I think you could definitely say that Republican administrations have been, and indeed, I would go so far as to say that in international tax negotiations, there have been instances in which officials representing the Treasury of the United States have essentially acceded to the avoidance of the United States corporate profits tax, which is an international tax. So in theory, all U.S. corporations are taxed based on profits no matter where they're earned. In practice, U.S. Treasury officials, who should be basically trying to collect money on behalf of the United States taxpayer, turned a blind eye to this under the ideology that this tax should not exist, so therefore we will not really enforce it and turn a blind eye as multinational corporations avoid it.
Right.
I would say, to get to the Obama administration, I think that has waned. This, you could say that this wasn't really the administration's decision as so much as derived from the endless back and forth with Congress. But when we finally got to the summer of 2011, when there was all this grand bargain negotiations, and then finally the end of 2012, I think, was the fiscal cliff and the negotiations around that. The ultimate upshot was that the Bush administration's tax cuts were extended indefinitely for all but people earning over some amount, like $250,000
I think it was
a year.
the top 2% of earners.
Right. But what was extended indefinitely was their dividend tax cut of 2003.
Right.
And as I was saying, anytime you're talking about capital income tax cuts, you're talking about tax cuts for the rich. But this rhetoric that, taxing capital income is bad for the economy nonetheless survived well enough that it's still in place in statute.
Right. So a very interesting, obviously, a lot of interesting things happened in 2016, and we had a sort of best of times, worst of times, and unfortunately, the worst of times has continued. We have this, this really disgusting guy as president. But the sort of from a political perspective, I mean, obviously we had Bernie Sanders, making the actual case for why we need national systems of delivery, and why essentially, yes, we need to have massive progressive taxation to fund these things in sort of a kind of basically just a kind of basic, obvious, muscular case for social democracy. And that, certainly caught fire, obviously, particularly with young people. And then Donald Trump, and this is where it seems to me we're at we're at an enormously dangerous point, right? Because Republicans control all the levers of power, and because people like, the Koch brothers, it's like they really are, and they're just, zombies for their tax, giveaways. And that's all they care about. And every other kind of metric of public well-being is obviously irrelevant for them in terms of their just sort of endless quest to give themselves more things. But Donald Trump, and this is where we can make, I think, those neo-Nixonian arguments, or call him like a dum-dum Nixon, credible, because, he fused together robust, racism, misogyny, xenophobia. We know that. He leveraged that. He stopped speaking in subtext like other Republicans, and he kind of did the robust white identity politics that drives the Republican base. And then he fused it with an actual, at times, not specific, but kind of general and atmospherically honest appraisal of things like the behavior of Wall Street. He promised not to touch Medicare and Social Security. He promised not to have, top-end loaded tax giveaways like Republicans usually propose. And, what's interesting is that even now as president, obviously he's, fusing his racism with basically just an attempt along with Congress to do a Koch brothers and other, corporate giveaway agenda. But he still has an instinct to at least lie about this. And before we get to the question, I do want to play this clip of him talking with Maria Bartiromo. I think this was over the weekend. And, it's funny because he's incoherent, but there is an actual point here about how he's still trying to sell what his tax package is going to be. Now, in fairness, only a framework has been released, which they're saying is not going to be less progressive than what exists. But, by all indications, and especially with what is in Congress and Mnuchin and Mulvaney, of course this is going to be another enormous regressive giveaway. But here's Trump.
But see, that's what I don't understand, and I followed your policies really closely. The state and local income tax deduction elimination, you take that away, and then you go to a fifth bracket or a fourth bracket, however you want to say it, and you get a higher rate for the top earners.
Right.
If the top earners pay 80% of the taxes, why are you so afraid to cut taxes on the top earners?
I think this, look, I am very happy with the way I've done prior to this in my civilian life, all right?
This is not about
other people. Well, it's about me representing rich people. Let's say representing, being representative of rich people. It's very interesting to me. Bob Kraft was down. He was very nice. He owns the Patriots. He gave me a Super Bowl ring a month ago, and he left.
And shook his, right?
Which was very nice. Yeah, that's right. But he left this beautiful ring, and I immediately give it to the White House, and they put it someplace, and that's the way it is. But he said to me, he's a good man. He said to me, "You have to do us all a favor. Give the tax decrease to the middle class. We don't need it. We don't need it. We don't want it. Give it to the middle class."
So there you have it. He's still framing this, even though obviously the agenda is to have a massive giveaway. But I think what this reveals as an opportunity, and where your piece comes in, is that at the very least now, and especially, and this is still incumbent upon the Democrats or the broader center left to actual left, to once and for all really get that taxes are a political issue. They're not a technocratic one. They're not a managerial one. It's a decision about what society we have. And the fact that Donald Trump is still doing this, and the fact that there's at least a need to pretend on some level, maybe at least means that the ideological blinders are coming off to some degree generally, and there's an opportunity to seize that moment and say, we need to tax the top end, not because it's moral or even because of a kind of vague Keynesian case, but because this is the only way we're going to basically have a functioning democracy with universal benefits that match the needs of our time?
I would go further than that. I think it's the only way that we're going to have a functioning economy that actually serves up a decent standard of living. And I think that in part because of the programs that progressive taxation can finance. But I think, moreover, it's about deconcentrating power in the economy. And a huge swath of our economic problems are due to the concentration of power both across firms, that is to say the biggest and most powerful firms taking market share and taking customers and profits from less powerful competitors, and within firms, that is to say shareholders and executives being able to run these enormously powerful firms how they see fit, which is to say getting as much money to the top as possible. And the crucial thing that progressive taxation can do is that it can redistribute power in the economy. And this is what I think has been missing from the center-left's tax ideology, insofar as it has one, is that there's a few elements of it. Among them, we need to make sure that the government has enough money and it doesn't run a deficit. There's we need to pay for programs that benefit you and your family, like Medicare and Medicaid. That's certainly true. But there has been this unwillingness to take on what the Republicans intuitively understand, which is to say that taxes fundamentally shape how the economy works. The Republicans just happen to be completely wrong about how they do that. It's not about cutting taxes so that rich people have the incentive to invest and that trickles down to everybody else. It's about raising taxes so the rich people don't have an incentive to steal from the rest of us. Right. And this was a crucial part of Roosevelt's economic ideology, and he didn't create it himself. It was a long tradition in the progressive and populist movements that led up to the New Deal. And it is something that, to my view, the contemporary left has forgotten, and forgotten in different ways. There's a tax ideology kind of in the center. There's a tax ideology on the left that has to do with paying for universal programs. And it's not that any of those are false, but that this crucial other element, the element that sits on top of it all, about what the function of taxes are in the economy and in the society, that has been totally forgotten. And I think that is something that the Republicans and that clip of Donald Trump reveals that they understand, and that we have just been totally blind to and unwilling to confront.
And as a final question, I mean, and that adds a whole other, like, even these moments when, say, like, because obviously Bernie Sanders is not making the full case that you're making, but I mean, he's, obviously sort of somebody in contemporary politics, he's at least making the universal programs case, which is just the beginning. But this notion that, even when you get a question from some, one of those idiots at a CNN town hall who's like, I'm a small business owner, like, maybe so, right? And I don't think I should have a tax cut, or I think everybody deserves a tax cut, or this kind of like, that sort of typical cliche. And the response is always, well, as you say, it's either like the Obama Clinton, got to pay for things, got to be responsible, or even the kind of like, I don't think morally the Koch brothers deserve a tax cut right now, or the Mercers deserve a tax giveaway right now. The next step is that, right, well, actually, this is just about power, and I'm interested in designing an economy so that these weird families can't steal more money from us and there's more jobs for you. What do you think of that?
Yeah, that is exactly what I think.
Right.
I think that's it's a great message, and it has the advantage of actually being what people already think. I mean, I think when Trump made that comment to Maria Bartiromo, I'm guessing he had some political advice that said that this is what the people want to hear. And I can tell you, at least in that respect, he's absolutely right. I think if you ask people what their top priority is in tax policy, it is that the wealthy and powerful corporations should have to pay their fair share, because everyone intuitively gets that the way the economy is set up now, these powerful entities are able to wriggle out of their obligations and they fall on the rest of us. Right. And that ultimately has a decisive effect on what their incentives are in terms of running the economy either to the broad public benefit or to their own private benefit. So I think really the politics of this could not be more clear-cut, and I hope that everyone from Senator Sanders to the biggest deficit hawk or whatever in the Democratic Party will take heed of where the politics of progressive taxation really are in this day and age.
It's about power. Marshall Steinbaum of the Roosevelt Institute. I really, really appreciate your time. We have a link to all of the ways that people can find you, as well as your article on the tax debate we need in the Jacobin. This is really important stuff. It's very well done. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody. We are going to go to the fun half, become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. Give us a review on iTunes, justcoffee.coop, fair trade tea, coffee, or chocolate. The IMs should be on 646-257-3920, 646-257-3920. A bunch of sound and all that good stuff in the fun half. Later. Fun half. Is that it? That's an abrupt end. Yeah. You can always tell when I'm hosting because I never listen to the La Poupée versions. Jimmy Cliff?
Jimi Hendrix likes to cut that off. Who's Jimmy Cliff?
You really don't know who Jimmy Cliff is?
No.
Honestly?
I thought that was a bit.
I mean, I did a dyslexia thing. Jimi Hendrix is. I know that was Jimi Hendrix, obviously, but you really don't know who Jimmy Cliff is? Oh boy, I'm gonna have to do. Well, no, he is a reggae guy, but that's not. That's like he's like a guy who has definitely been in like your cultural radar. Like he's not exactly Bob Marley level, but that's not also like.
I wonder how many Jimmy Cliff records sold in Bismarck, North Dakota.
I bet that there's some guy in Bismarck who has
probably a few,
snowy Jimmy Cliff record collection. All right, let's play some sound. So let's start with Mike Pompeo, who is Trump's CIA director. Now, there was a story.
Sorry, he's the Koch brothers CIA director.
Right. Exactly. There was a story. He's a former ultra-right Koch brothers congressman from Kansas. There's a story over the weekend in the New York Times that a CIA agent whose name has been released before, Mike, I'm forgetting his last name. Maybe somebody could look it up for me. His name was revealed a couple of years ago, and there's a sort of mythology built around him because he's known as this tremendous, ruthless CIA operative, and quite clearly was involved in the torture program. He's involved in the drone program. And then this notion that apparently he converted to Islam because he has a Muslim wife, I think, he met stationed overseas. He's known as an extremely aggressive operative, and he has been put in charge of the Iran portfolio, which obviously is an indication that this escalation against Iran is going to deepen. I think if you just look up CIA Iran, it's a New York Times story, it will come up pretty fast. And, there's no doubt that the Republican, neoconservative, ultra-right establishment has never wanted the Iran deal. There is a small group of people in the world that don't want this deal, and that's crazy people here, horrible people in Saudi Arabia. Mike D'Andrea. So it's horrible, is the CIA operative. Mike D'Andrea is who we're talking about. Extremists here, horrible people here, horrible people in Saudi Arabia, and horrible and demented people in Israel. People who either want to use Iran as a foil, as Israel has. Israel would love to point to Iranian conduct as a sort of prime distraction from its ongoing occupation and siege and everything else. Saudi Arabia views Iran as a prime enemy in a proxy war, which it is, but it's been primarily an instigator of itself. And fanatics in the United States have always agitated for conflict with Iran, just as fanatics in Iran have advocated for conflict with the United States. There's some people in the administration, I think McMaster is an example, who do have an understanding of why the Iran deal is working, but they also clearly hold a grudge against Iran because of things that Iran did in Iraq during our occupation of Iraq. There's no doubt they were funding some Shiite and training Shiite militias that killed U.S. troops there. Again, it's proxy war activity, not justifying it, but that's reality. And this is not, we don't have to have a rose-colored view of any of these places, but the deal is working. And undermining the deal is one of the, in addition to all of the other insanity in the world that is being unleashed, one of the greatest threats to global stability and peace imaginable, and really probably the prime foreign policy achievement of at least the last decade. The Iran deal is negotiated by the P5+1, and all credit, of course, to John Kerry and Wendy Sherman for that. This is Mike Pompeo. In light of these moves, he's talking to the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which is an extremist far-right think tank in Washington. And this is how a guy who controls, and still, remember, we knew under Obama that the drone program was killing civilians and was not properly legally codified and audited. And people like us who criticized it, not only were we criticizing the Obama administration's failures, but we were saying, look, what about when an absolutely insane, demented Republican takes over and there's no rules on this stuff? What's going to happen then? Well, listen to the mentality that your director of the CIA has right now.
And so we've now laid out a strategy for how we're going to execute our mission with incredible vigor. We're going to become a much more vicious agency in ensuring that we're delivering this work. We're going to go to the hardest places with some of the hardest people in our organization to crush it. And when we do that, the president has promised that he will have our backs.
Well, there you have it. He sounds just like Trump.
That was probably the only thing Trump said is like, I got your back. Do what you need to do.
I got your back. Just be vicious. Just be vicious. And again, to all the people on like that weird dumb left margin that had a notion that somehow because, maybe some people from intelligence services have leaked things about Donald Trump, that he was going to be some operative against the deep state. You're fucking delusional.
The deep state's worst nightmare.
The deep state's worst nightmare. Because I'm super concerned about civilian casualties in the military-industrial complex. It's not to say that Hillary Clinton wouldn't have been terrible on foreign policy, but she also isn't somebody who might randomly drop a nuke.
This is so deep. It's a deep state.
Boom. I stand corrected. Sean Hannity and Donald Trump are going to rein in U.S. drone wars, covert actions, support coups, death squads, and civilian casualties across the globe. Of course. And you just heard it there at Mike Pompeo. They're going to be even more vicious. Jesus Christ. People really got up on some dumb shit during the election. You're calling from a 718 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael, this is Warren. I'm calling from Brooklyn. How are you?
Hey, Warren. What's going on, man?
Well, I was just very interested in this, the tax policy that you guys were just talking about. There's a really, really good book called We Are Better Than This. It's basically written by this a tax accountant who worked on the JCT, which is the Joint Committee on Taxation. And it really describes what where we spend the money on, and that's he was a tax lawyer and now he's a teacher. So it's really interesting to hear what this guy had to say. I'm wondering if you read this book. It's really, really good.
No, I haven't. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's just really bizarre. Like, you look at our tax code, it weighs 16 pounds, and it's like 16,000 pages long, it's just really fascinating when you think about it.
Yeah. No, thank you. I'll look that up. When did it come out?
A couple years ago. This is way before Trump. And it's one of the things that what Trump is trying to do is he's a completely idiot. It's just, don't get me started.
Just trying to do a lot of things, trying to make things happen. I'm an idiot.
Yeah,
You're the idiot. You're the puppet. You're the puppet. She's the puppet. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
I'm no puppet.
But yeah,
she's the puppet.
Yes, that's very true.
Well, I appreciate the call, boss. You have anything else?
No problem.
Thanks, man.
No, that's basically. Everyone should read this book. It's very tough to read unless you're a tax attorney.
Tough stuff.
So it's
tough stuff.
It's very dense.
Checks in the mail.
Later, buddy.
Thanks, boss. Bye-bye. All right. So the President's Show, generally the President's Show nails it, but obviously we can't play all of their clips. I thought the one a couple of weeks ago where he hung out with the former Mafia guys was perfect.
We did play that one, though.
We did. No, that's what I'm saying. So we haven't played one since then. And now, somebody was asking me. I was on this really good podcast called The Pineal Express, and they were asking me, like, as separate from, because I've taken, and Sam and I have both taken criticism, and I think, like, finding the right terminology to use when you talk about Trump's mental state is obviously very difficult, and we need to be careful about it. But they were asking me a different question, which is that some people say, like, oh, I don't want to speculate about anything involving what's going on with him mentally or emotionally because that's just armchair speculation. And I was like, guys, like, that's like watching a video of, like, somebody, like, flatlining when they're trying to do, like, a skateboarding trick and sitting there and being like, I don't want to speculate. I mean, I don't want an armchair. I don't know whether that guy completely fell on his face or not. Like, I am aware that I have consistently failed, apparently, in using the right appropriate terminology to describe this, and so I'm going to still refrain. But at the same time, the notion that any human being with basic observational ability, and I'm saying, like, going down to maybe like a first grade level, couldn't look at Donald Trump and be like, that's not normal. There's something wrong with that guy. Does not require. It's the opposite. It's the opposite of armchair projection. saying that you don't want to comment on it is like armchair blindfolding yourself. And so here on the President Show, in this, which I think is really, this impression of Trump to me is like, I think this is as close, this is basically Trump. And he finally went to see a psychiatrist.
Okay, sir, here we
Wait a
are.
minute, where's the sliders?
There are no sliders, sir. We are not at a chain restaurant. We are at a psychologist's office.
No
yes,
way.
sir.
No,
Sorry,
no.
sir,
Mike.
sit down. Listen.
Sit down, Mike. Sit
Okay,
down.
okay. Sir, people are saying you are mentally unfit for the office, and we both know that's not true.
I'm incredibly mentally fit. My doctor said I had the most neurons of any person he had ever met.
I wish I had
so
as
many neurons.
Oh. You know, you can talk about yourself the entire
Whoa,
time. Yeah.
I can talk about myself.
Yeah, you talk about yourself.
I'm totally sane, and I'm the President of the United States.
Mr. Trump, I feel I need to disclose to you that I'm the founder of an organization called Duty to Warn.
I don't care.
Well, I think you should know that our association advocates your removal under the 25th Amendment because we believe you're not psychologically fit.
Wrong.
Well,
totally wrong.
You make a lot of grandiose and paranoid-sounding statements like you had the biggest inauguration crowd.
Oh, yeah.
And that Barack Obama bugged your offices.
He's spying on everybody.
So here's my question. Do you really believe those things you say?
No. Yes? Did I get it right?
Well, it seems like you have an unusual need for approval.
People must see Trump everywhere because I grew up in Queens and then we went into Manhattan. Everyone else in Manhattan was rich and they went to the parties. They went to Studio 54 and they did coke off of Twiggy's asshole. I didn't get to do any of that. I had to go to Studio 54 and stand on the line. One time I met Andy Warhol and I thought that he was just a sheepskin rug. I was always left out. A doughy boy from Queens with big, juicy, kissy lips.
Well, I'm glad you can own some of that insecurity.
Is it okay that I've been farting on the sofa the whole time?
Well, that's okay. Let's move on.
Well, there you have it. I actually think as good as that impression is, that might still be a degree of self-awareness too far for the actual
I
Trump.
think a lot of this actually is to do with his childhood and being, raised in that sort of household. Like, I mean, I think
yes,
of like
an emphasis on that sort of household.
I think
look
of
up
that.
Look up his dad.
The Aviator too, like even just the extreme wealth, and even if it wasn't that extreme, like being in that sort of, and like I don't know, it's pathologizing.
No, he was a upper end Queens scumbag family, and I mean, fucking just evil landlord shit. That's bad. That's really bad.
If you're ever in New York too, it's definitely worth getting out to Queens and checking out his house because it's in like a very middle class part of town, except for about 3 streets where his house is on, and there's an entrance that says Jamaica Estates.
Jamaica Estates, exactly. Yeah, and all the like mafia worship. The other one that was funny was the one they did one where Deepak Chopra led him in a meditation exercise, and he went into his subconscious, and his subconscious was just terrifying. It was like like people like drowning each other in blood, and he sees like this this like girl, and he's gonna approach her, and then she turns around and she's like an old like crone, like in that like mythological sense, and she's like, I'm your age, and he's like, no, and he runs away from her, and then at the end he cries and he realizes that like the clown with blood and the crone and it's like totally like Jungian. He's like, we're all the same. And then Deepak takes him out of the meditation. He's like, did you learn anything? And he's like, nope. Nope. It's perfect. He's just like, nope, not going to change. Didn't learn anything.
But namaste. Anyway.
Yeah, namaste in a certain sense. You're calling from an 860 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, hi, this is Michael in Denver.
Hey, Michael, what's going on, man?
Not much. So, something that y'all talked about on the show a lot is talking with people and trying to like change minds.
Yep.
I know that personally you don't really. I believe you've gone so far as to say that like you don't believe in changing minds.
Yeah, it's a primary thing. Like I mean, as an actual like I don't believe in that, period. No.
But as like a goal for an interaction, it's a lofty thing that you're probably not going to get.
In an interaction itself, yeah. I mean, the best case scenario, I think, is that
Anyway,
you give them something to think
I was
about.
out at a show. I was talking with people. We were talking about politics in the local Denver area, and I did the thing where you just try to ask people questions. Try to change their mind. You just try to bring them to a point where they're thinking about something that they haven't thought about before, and let them change their minds for themselves. So
I think it depends on what issue you're talking about.
Well, we were talking about spending. We were talking about law, and generally, I had some friends of mine that were trying to do the libertarian. We should have fewer laws because we can't enforce the laws that we have. And I just asked them, well, why don't we spend more money on enforcement? If that's the issue that you're saying, before we start tearing stuff down, why don't we try to fix it?
Mm-hmm.
And they just never thought about it like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I buy it. I mean, I'm not opposed to engaging with people and framing things and asking questions. I'm not even opposed. I read Bree, who's on my show, a part of my show all the time. She wrote a piece for Current Affairs about, talking to white supremacists and how you should do it.
Yeah.
How you should be armed.
Exactly.
Well, sure.
And that's the thing. We all got to be out there talking to people.
Yeah, but I still don't.
If you can't change people's minds, then.
Well, but I don't. I still don't. Well, I've never.
Get a little grim for me sometimes.
Well, I don't think, I'm not going to lie to you, though. I don't think that that's the primary thing that needs to be done.
It's more of a hobby.
And I don't think that it's in any type of way something to build a political project. Like, if your political project, if your
interactions we have with each other are the foundations of the political interactions we have with each other, aren't they?
If your political project hinges on convincing a bunch of people to radically transform their worldview and who they are in a short period of time to do something practical, like vote the right way, that's not a durable political
that's ridiculous.
project.
But if we're
So
talking
that's all
about
that we've ever said.
change outside of the political cycle, we've got to remember that these people that we live next to, even if we don't like them, they're our fellow human beings. They're our friends. We need to treat them as such, and we can't write them off.
Hey, fellow fucking human beings. What's kind of, you don't have a Denver accent. If I could do a little bit of a centralizing myself.
I'm from the East Coast.
Yeah,
I just
you are.
moved here, like everybody in the fuck out.
Clearly. You gotta recognize your name is fucking humanity, or else we're all to the fucking dogs.
No, I agree with your general point.
man.
I just think you got to separate it from what your political actions are. I think you can't expect much for. I mean, yeah, by all means, try to make common ground with your neighbors.
To someone and if I'm not approaching every interaction as a potential political interaction, then what the hell am I doing?
Dude, I would never. Then we should be sharper about what we're saying then. I have never said, I think you'd have interaction. I think people need to have interactions of solidarity and actual real life interactions with people as much as possible, frankly.
Amen.
Regardless of what their politics are. People just need to literally be, our types of politics is dependent on starting to getting to know your neighbors and things like that. No doubt about that. But at the same time, I think that there is a broader pathology on the left that the right doesn't have, of this obsession with persuasion, which I don't buy. I think it's much more
fact.
Right. So look, but if your general point is that, but I would also suggest, and I would maybe read Bree's article as an example. I think that you need to really think about how it's done and how you unsettle people and what you're appealing to. And I also think that there is a chunk a chunk of people that are not persuadable. I think that that's real. And I think that it would be a fantasy to think.
And all I'm worried about is if we all go around acting like the people out there that are unpersuadable are the people that we need to be worrying about, it's going to prevent us from talking to those people who are close to us, that have perspectives and opinions that are close to our own, but because, they heard something on the radio or they heard something from the podcast that they listened to that sounded persuasive, but they didn't have time to think it through, they might be on the verge of falling into, like with my friends the other night at the show. They were just on the verge of falling into this libertarian, we can't enforce the laws we have, so why don't we just get rid of them, We got to watch out for the people around us and try to steer them back when they go astray.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's also a lot easier that if your friends heard something stupid on a podcast and were like, oh, maybe that makes sense, but they're not kind of fully. I think it's also like, there's another conversation that requires a lot of distinctions. You know, maybe they're not fully paid up into a worldview, you know. Was the podcast that was like, have you ever just like gotten high and driven through the Palisades Parkway? Was it that podcast?
Oh, Lord. I have no idea.
It's my Rogan
I
impression.
just know that there's a story.
All right, man.
It may have been
I
someone
appreciate
that
you.
they heard from their neighbor. We'll
All
talk to you later. Have a
all
good
right, all right. Thanks, boss. Bye. Like, you can't talk to your fucking neighbors, and what hope do we have? It's a shared fucking human enterprise here. Shared fucking human enterprise. You ever see Sarah fucking Huckabee? Everybody should be able to recoil in fucking horror.
I mean, I think there's a small point to be made. Like, don't be an asshole to people who might be persuadable in person. Like, you are a representative.
Yes.
You're like, if you're a DSA, for instance, right? You want to represent well, because then people be like, oh, I talked to that nice DSA person, and it was the first open socialist I talked to, and they were very polite, and they were very informed, and I had a good conversation. Like, that stuff matters, but I think what we're addressing is people who watch Glenn Beck every day or stuff like that.
You represent. That's a good point, though. You represent a brand, and I actually think there's. I will actually say, not that I've gotten people to change their politics, but I definitely notice in private life or whatever, socially, and then also in certain media appearances, because the left has been so branded as like the only things we care about are like, you know, saying like we drive Priuses and you don't, or what, or you know, different kind of like signifiers, that when you come out of the gate with like, I mean, yes, driving a Prius is better than driving an SUV for the environment, or obviously I support the rights of people from all backgrounds and experiences, but like I have a materially driven worldview, and I'm interested in like, you know, tax cuts, tax policies about power as an example. Usually for a lot of people, they have not heard that perspective before, and they're used to slotting liberals into a very specific lane. And there are cliches that everybody falls into, including obviously liberals, of like being offended, being holier than thou, having a little bit of like snobbery. Like, not all of that is made up. And so I've had the experience of people, at the very least, like they're like, oh, well, that's something I haven't heard before. You know, you're at least representing something that is a different viewpoint, whether they agree with you or not, that doesn't fall into the same standard lazy categories. I think it's, of course, it's worthwhile. I just don't think it's like the ultimate paramount project of our time. And I think if you go to right-wing media and those sources, like, yeah, they want to fight a propaganda war and they think about it really seriously and they dump a lot of money into it, but they don't have this like endless navel gazing of like, how do we convince people to fuck themselves? How do we convince people to buy into our economic mythology? They just kind of are like, we need 50 plus 1. Can a combination of voter suppression, white identity politics, and unlimited plutocratic money get us there? Yeah, let's do it. And I think we need a little bit more of that workman-like attitude on our side, frankly. Okay. What is this? Oh, that's Turning Point USA. What is this? Okay, all right. Well, first let's go to, this is actually an interesting point. I can't decide whether Alex Jones appreciates this or whether it pisses him off. I actually kind of feel like he appreciates this. Media Matters with David Brock and other dishonest George Soros agents. They put together a montage of Alex Jones basically shouting out Sean Hannity. Now, Alex Jones used to hate on Glenn Beck because he used to say, you know, like Glenn Beck basically takes my shit and then kind of glosses it over a little bit. And I'm like the real conspiracy indie band.
Alex Jones is the Radiohead to Glenn Beck's Coldplay.
That was exactly how Alex Jones flamed, like literally, right? Like I don't think he probably didn't exactly use that example, but that's basically what he was saying. Now, of course, Alex Jones is like the forefront of Trump era media. Glenn Beck's pretty irrelevant. I don't even know what he's trying to do. And Sean Hannity has gone from, you know, Bush era, like let's go to a country show and wave flags and talk about nuking Afghans and then be like, why are you guys so angry? And, all of that Bush era shit. And now Sean Hannity's talking about CIA plots and the deep state and all these other things that he doesn't know anything about. By the way, there are a lot of CIA plots in the world, none of which these people want to talk about. They usually involve supporting like juntas and death squads in the Middle East or Asia as an example. But this is Alex Jones apparently really digging that Sean Hannity is aping his style.
Fox News' Sean Hannity is encroaching on Alex Jones' territory. Literally. We fired up the bat signal, and Hannity's doing the right thing. So often people say, man, Sean Hannity is copying you almost every night word for word. I'm like, let's not make a big deal out of that. Now Sean Hannity has said what I've been warning you of, soft coup against the president.
A soft coup is underway right here in the United States of America.
Sean Hannity was like InfoWars.
The globalist establishment. Globalist establishment.
Sean Hannity then, word for word, uses my terms, clear and present danger.
A clear and present danger.
That's the term I started using about 2 months ago. Now Hannity uses it. And then he looked into the Seth Rich case.
Explosive developments in the mysterious murder of former DNC staffer Seth Rich. DNC staffer Seth Rich. Seth Rich continues to get a huge amount of attention.
I want more. I love Sean Hannity getting hardcore. Let's play a little clip of Hannity. Here it is.
Mission creep I've been telling you about. Well, it's now turned into an out of control, what is a political witch hunt. It needs to be stopped.
Suddenly, Sean Hannity saying the exact words, the exact facts. Deep state operatives.
Deep state operatives.
Deep state leaks.
Deep state leaks.
I say the same things. Sean Hannity says the same things. The deep state prepares to try to bring down our president.
The deep state trying to take down the president.
Obama putting a shadow government in.
Obama, deep state, shadow government.
Saying the same term I use. Deep state, shadow government.
Deep state, shadow government.
The shadow government.
Shadow government. This is so deep. It's a deep state.
Sean Hannity is one of the most important people in America because he's the only lifeline we've got to the president, and the president's acting on it. Sean Hannity talks to President Trump 2 or 3 times a day, sometimes at length, and they want to get rid of Hannity because they know the president's so isolated now. The pinhole he's got is Sean Hannity. No one in media talks to President Trump more than Sean Hannity. They talk every day. I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to be the only guy out here knocking grand slams every day, okay?
I genuinely can't read that. Is there passive aggressiveness, or is it like or flattery and an attempt at a bromance?
I think he sees him as a conduit to get to the president. Like this is his back channel into the White House.
Wouldn't that piss him off though? Wouldn't he want his own direct channel?
Yeah, there's 2 ways that he could play it. One is he's coming on my turf. Right. But if you can't win that war, you might as well say, hey, look at, he's basically on the end of my strings.
Right. And appreciate it. So we last saw Bill O'Reilly talking about Jared Kushner. He was doing a segment on his new YouTube or whatever show. I mean, a show basically like this, a YouTube podcast show.
Yeah, but you got to pay for it. It's not for
You got to pay for it. You got to pay, all right? All right? You got to pay. It's behind a paywall. So we were watching him, and yes, this will transition well to that segment. We'll get to that in a second. And he was like, I think it would be a legitimate guess that he was drinking very, very heavily before he's like, Jared Kushner. And he's been kind of laying low. Sean Hannity, I believe, hosted him actually the other day on Fox, and he's been making the rounds. Does he have a new, like, somebody getting killed book? Is that why he's coming back? Is that why he was on Lara a couple weeks ago? I think he does. I think he
Killing England.
Yeah,
that's right.
Somebody else got killed, and Bill O'Reilly's writing about it. And the New York Times reports that previous harassment settlements involving Bill O'Reilly during his time at Fox, that the settlements have reached up to $45 million, according to the New York Times. Bill O'Reilly has said, never mistreated anyone. Gretchen Carlson, and this was, I think, when the figure was at $30 million. I guess the figure's gotten higher, but Gretchen Carlson, who was, of course, formerly at Fox News, she quote tweeted and was like, I don't think anybody settles something for $30 million that they didn't do. And he said, you know, you got an incredible rack, Gretchen, but you're a bitch. No, he didn't actually say that, but it would be ironic. I don't regret. Everything we did was consensual, Gretchen. So Bill O'Reilly, after this news came out, has dismissed the New York Times report as, quote, lies and smear. A New York Times report saying that 21st Century Fox had signed O'Reilly to a contract extension months after O'Reilly reached a $32 million sexual harassment settlement with longtime network candidate Liz Weil. This is what O'Reilly said, and apparently this is today. I don't know when his show gets up, and it's behind a paywall. My investigation team has done a tremendous, superb job in exposing the lies and smear, O'Reilly tweeted late Wednesday.
Does he care to
Saturday.
name those people in the investigation team? I'd like to know who is that. Who
Fuck
that
it.
is.
We'll do it live. He tweeted this out Saturday in response to the New York Times article. I will speak with you on Monday. He also posted a statement from a spokesperson, Mark Fabiani, saying that the Times once again has maliciously smeared Bill O'Reilly, this time even failing to print a sworn affidavit from his former lawyer, Liz Weil, refuting all allegations. Well, and the Times responded, Mr. Fabini addresses everything but what the story actually says. This article, like our previous reporting on the subject, is accurate, deeply reported, and we welcome any challenge to the facts. Yeah, well, no wait on that. All right? It's dishonest. Hey, Mrs. Mochaccino. I think Bill O'Reilly ever just kind of randomly wanders around Long Island looking for women to accost and harass?
I think it
just
depends
for old time's sake?
on what the account on his law defense fund looks like. Like when that starts looking pretty healthy, I think he starts to feel himself a bit more.
Bill, seriously, dude, I'm your lawyer. I don't mind taking this money, but you should slow down. You're already grossly overcompensated for being an aging racist blowhard.
Let me go on vacation.
Yeah, just dude, I'm trying to take my family to Aruba. Is there one fucking female colleague at Fox that you cannot bother? Yeah, it comes from the top. It's organizational culture. It comes from males. Hey, Waters, you faggot. You're not going to harass her in the hallway? Fox News is like Bill Cosby. It was like, or we'll get to this in a second, like Harvey Weinstein. Like you're like, okay, this person was this thing, and they were a sexual predator. But then you start to wonder with someone like Bill Cosby, you're like, was all of this career success just was the drive behind it just to be in a position so you could be a serial rapist and assaulter, right? And with you wonder. And then with Fox, it's like, I get to be like a machine of American fascism and corporate interest, but what was the actual purpose of this network? It's like a systemic sexual assault cartel. I mean, that's what it is in my opinion. I mean, honestly, how many stories have come out of that place starting from the top? I mean, we were saying earlier, we were talking about one of the Fox anchors, and we're like, we haven't had a story about him. I guess he must be okay in that context, which means didn't harass somebody in the fucking hallway. Great bar. I know that I'm obviously being a really unfair SJW by noting this. I remember that was what Dave Rubin tweeted when the Bill O'Reilly thing first came out. It was something to the effect of I can't comment on what actually happened, but it's really upset to see people so happy by somebody being taken down. Which is exactly just
I was so happy to see Bill O'Reilly get taken down for that.
Yeah, I would imagine there was a lot of other people that were happy.
People so happy over justice being publicly served.
Yeah, oh, look at you getting, exactly, convicted of murder. Oh. I imagine other people that were happy about what happened to Bill O'Reilly was women who work with him. Maybe they were happy, fucking asshole. All right. So now Fox, which of course has had this endless string of stories of abusive women, but they're still one of the main Republican propaganda mouthpieces in the country, and they need to be on the Weinstein beat. Now, of course, Harvey Weinstein is obviously absolutely despicable, and if even a fifth of what was said about him is true, he should go to jail. I'm assuming 90 to 100% of it is true. But this is one of the B team on Fox. He doesn't even usually make it into our clips. Brendan's such a pro. He knew exactly who he was. I didn't really know who this guy was. Garrett Jarrett.
Greg Jarrett.
I really wanted his name to be Garrett Jarrett. Okay, Greg Jarrett. Talking about what should happen with the Weinstein Company. And it's just maybe a little ironic.
The other thing, I wrote a column that said the Weinstein Company should shut its doors and do three things: apologize sincerely, 2, set up a fund for the many victims, and the list will continue to grow, and finally, contribute tens of millions of dollars to organizations that are dedicated to helping abused women. And then it should close down operations.
Abuse women. So, you know what, Greg Jarrett, mini Sean Hannity. I agree with you completely. I actually think that would be exactly what the Weinstein Company should do. I also think that's what Fox should do.
Yeah, it'd be
not
fun.
to be like too on the nose here, but I mean, when you are that on the nose yourself,
I think corporate death sentences should be a real thing that we should institute.
it would be literally the only benefit of saying corporations are people and having the death penalty, which are two unbelievably regressive, stupid things.
called the synergy.
But just synergy. I'm seeing a lot of synergy opportunity with corporate death sentences. But this guy's like, he's like sitting. It's like he's like sitting in Pablo Escobar's den, and he's just like, you know what the Cali cartel should do? They should apologize and suspend operations. He's like in Mexico. He's like, you know what? He's like, here I am with these Zetas, and I just would like to say that the Gulf cartel, they should apologize and cease operations immediately. All right. What is this Turning Point USA thing, guys? You're going to need to help me on this.
So on Friday, Turning Point's Kent State chapter decided that they were going to protest safe spaces by dressing up in adult diapers and in a simulation crib.
Socialism or barbarism?
So, Brendan, you want to cut to that?
Okay. So this is like great, like right-wing street theater. Yeah. So you remember how like Abby Hoffman and I think Jerry Rubin, they actually threw money in the New York Stock Exchange? And a bunch of like stockbrokers scrambled on the floor and grabbed it.
Right.
Right. Like this hilarious, actually very revealing piece of provocative street theater that also like targeted one of the most powerful institutions on the planet. And the right, and particularly the alt-right, they have always been obsessed with stealing the left's thunder. This is another reason why the left needs to get back in touch with some of its more fun roots. Because we really should be the masters of this sort of thing. But the right can never nail it like that. So their attempt to get into the street theater comedy game is dressing up in diapers to mock safe spaces.
And so the national chapter subsequently has distanced themselves with this statement. Saying,
So Turning Points USA was so humiliating because the photos are stupid and disgusting and embarrassing and unfunny and blah, blah, blah. And so even it was sort of like Ben Shapiro having to be like, well, actually what we do is we subtly say that the Native Americans were savages and they deserve genocide, but you don't do it as overtly as a cartoon where you literally celebrate them having a genocide. So Turning Point USA, which is some far-right college.
Foster Freeze is
Foster Freeze.
Yeah,
right.
Youthful fascist brigade.
Right. They're the youthful fascists. They're part of like the contingent. They're Foster Freeze, so they have to be like the alt-right guys that still also have to be anti-abortion. Foster Freeze was the guy who told, I think it was Andrea Mitchell on MSNBC in 2004 in 2012 or 2011. That back in his day, the girls used to just put something in between their knees.
Oh, a penny between their knees or something like that? That was that guy.
That guy.
Right. Or aspirin between the knees.
Aspirin between the knees as a substitute for birth control. And it was another one of these great examples that if people could ever learn from these things, which is that just because you're a billionaire does not mean you're not a fucking moron. So Kent State, Turning Points USA released this statement on the Kent State quote-unquote safe space event. Yesterday, it came to our attention that one of our chapters did an event opposing safe spaces at Kent State University. While we support all of our chapters to do innovative and creative activism, This event clearly crossed the line and delved into obscure and inappropriate. I think you're just looking for lame and failed. The attention of the event was to criticize safe spaces, which we support. However, the execution and choice of imagery was in poor taste. Some ideas work great. Other ideas get a mixed reaction. We are strong opponents of the safe space, microaggression, trigger warning culture, blah, 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 that has been created on campuses. In particular, the event was not approved by our regional or local field staff. We remain committed to advancing the ideals of free speech and free market on college campuses, network each and every day, blah, 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 snooze.
I was simply trying to fix the culture in many ways.
Exactly. It is really amazing. Like, okay, so free market, like, fuck the free market, okay? But I actually, like, there's no one in this room that actually opposes, like, free speech and open debate. But the fact that these idiots have so toxified that brand that you do start going back and you're like, maybe we have to do a revisionist history of Stalin, because if all those people were this fucking annoying,
got to deal with it somehow.
I mean, at some point you got to do some tough stuff. And if you're still in college and you think dressing up as a diaper, I'm like, okay, this is just like, I know that this is like, it's already, we've talked about college campus shit more than it should ever be talked about in a public forum. But like, okay, can you find examples? Okay, there was a thing in Berkeley the other day where these college students, they demanded that a final be canceled because it was like oppressive because they were stressed. Okay, like, yeah, that's pretty funny. Can always, and I wish I had thought of that while I was in college. It seems like a great scam. But like, you know, okay, you can always find examples of stupid behavior. And by the way, at an incredibly small amount of
by
colleges,
older adolescents.
By older adolescents. And by the way, like an incredibly narrow amount of colleges. And then there's a substantive conversation. Should colleges disrupt and ridicule and mock and, you know, give some noxious person like Charles Murray a hard time when he comes to campus? Absolutely. Should they go to the administration and say that they should be canceled? I don't think so. And I primarily don't think so for practical reasons, because I think that those types of rules and that type of empowerment of administration is almost certainly going to end up getting used against the actual left. So there's like one lane of like, anybody can find a silly example from a college, and then there's one lane of like, oh, we should actually have some subtlety and conversation about this, I guess particularly if you work on a campus and that's your life. And then there's like this third track where like the origin of trigger warnings are like, I got triggered a couple of weeks ago when we had that guest on from University of Michigan who talked about stress and cortisol levels and inequality. Because I thought about some of the things that I experienced in my childhood and some of the things that my family went through, and so I got stressed. Okay, and that's fine, and I know how to manage it, and it's my job and whatever. But literally the origin of a fucking trigger warning was to say, like, we're going to read about a rape case. Maybe if you've been raped, you should be aware of that before we go into the details of this case. That's it. And if you have a problem with that or think that that is somehow like out of the bounds of intellectual discourse or limiting you to the exposure to the really great fresh ideas of like overcompensated pseudoscientific racists.
Stephen Molyneux.
Yeah, or what? Yeah, or some cult leaders or whatever. I mean, I just... Yeah, Stephen Molyneux. Like, what is it? Some YouTube idiot, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just complete morons.
Yeah, just some morons. I mean, okay, whatever. But, like, the origin is basically just, like, some sort of just basic human sensitivity. Now, can anything get taken and abused? Sure. But in the vast majority of cases of how these things are deployed in college campuses, to the extent that they're deployed at all, it's just a little like, hey, might want to look out for that. I mean, are these the same people, at least in the Foster Freeze case, maybe some, you know, young alt-right people and their libertarian, like, do you, I don't know, do you post ratings on video games and movies? I mean, I don't know. Like, maybe they're stupid. Maybe they don't work. But, like, it's the same principle. It's just like, hey, heads up.
Well, it's a basic.
It's not that complicated.
It's a basic tactic, though, that you'd rather spend. You know, you're going to spend some time arguing if you're on the right.
Right.
So you want to make the debate about whether you have the right to say the shit rather than what you're actually saying, because that debate's fucking over.
That debate. Well, that's what they're reopening, right? Exactly.
But they don't want to say they're reopening these things. The people that want that reopened, they'll find them through because this is all a giant dog whistle.
Exactly. And, you know, I just watched a movie on the plane the other week. I cannot remember the name of it, but it was about the David Irving case. And David Irving is the Holocaust-denying British historian, and he sued a Jewish Holocaust scholar who taught, I think, at Emory. And he sued her. She called him a quack or something. He sued her in British court where libel is, like, you know, tilted in favor of the...
First Amendment's a good amendment.
First Amendment's a very good amendment. So he sued her in Britain because the burden was on her to prove that he, you know, was a quack, essentially, versus the burden on him to prove that she was libeling him. And the whole beginning of that movie, when he confronts her in public... And all of the tactics that he uses as a Holocaust denier are all, she won't debate me. She won't air out ideas in public. It's all the same hustle and the same bullshit that you hear from these people. And it's all in service of exactly what you'd expect. Racism, Holocaust denial, misogyny, anti-Semitism.
Incidentally, David Irving is colleagues with Susan Gorka, who helped him with some translation work, I believe.
The missus has some very strong ideas about the Holocaust. Jesus Christ. Oh, these people are all so disgusting. And speaking of truly disgusting people, you remember Tom Price? He's the former health secretary. Got fired for shedding private jets all around the country. And before that was involved in shady insider stock stuff. And
you mean lucky?
Very lucky. He had some incredibly lucky stock tips about legislation that he was voting on. Well, it turns out that his wife is also a disgusting person and a very boring person. So I want to warn you, this is one of these pieces of sound that is both, like, you're going to be caught in between being upset at how morally repugnant it is and caught between dozing off because she's a strikingly bad public speaker. But this is Representative Betty Price talking in a meeting of the Georgia State Legislature. She's the wife of former Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price. And just think about that. This is the person that Tom Price went to bed next to every night.
Dr. Price.
Thank you. My thinking sometimes goes in strange directions, but before you proceed, if you wouldn't mind commenting on the surveillance of partners, tracking of contacts, that sort of thing. What are we legally able to do? And I don't want to say the quarantine word, but I guess I just said it. I mean, is there an ability since...
She's talking about people with HIV.
Since I would guess that public dollars are expended heavily in prophylaxis and treatment of this condition, so we have a public interest in curtailing the spread. Right. What would you advise, or are there any methods, legally that we could do that would curtail the spread?
So, yeah, she was just talking about quarantining people with HIV.
What can we do legally? It's like we're going after some terror cell or something.
I think that's what she thinks. There you have it. And just to be clear, like the social conservatism in the kind of 90s, like crazy Christian coalition sense is not at the forefront of the kind of white identity and the racism that fuels the trendy right now and the neo-fascism. But like that stuff is coming back too. I mean, these people stay in there. All this stuff is, obviously an assault on women's health and reproductive justice, obviously. But I wouldn't be surprised they put marriage equality back in play.
Well, and all those groups that are still there, they've been being told by the Republicans that, hey, once we get in, you're in. And of course, Priebus doesn't intend to satisfy all of those people, but some are probably going to get satisfied. We see the anti-trans stuff in the military.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the anti-trans stuff is the first, because there's still much more kind of widely accepted bigotry of trans
working
people.
backwards.
Yeah, work it backwards. First you exploit and abuse the trans people, then you put the gay people back in play.
I mean, just listen to what Jerry Falwell has to say.
Right.
Since Trump's been elected, he's still behind him, still as happy as ever.
That's exactly right. I'm wondering if AIM is supposed to be put down. It might be down to. I think that because I see Adium.
Oh, we haven't found our replacement yet.
We haven't found a replacement yet, and I've never had this experience where it's just not opening like that before, and it says it's offline. So, I think that might be it. You're calling from a 487 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 487.
Hello?
Excuse me, 484. I apologize. I misread that. Are you there?
Oh, hey, that's fine. That's totally fine. Hey, Kevin from Pennsylvania. How you
Hey,
doing?
Kevin. What's going on, man?
Not much. Did you, I didn't catch it until 1 o'clock today on the show. Did y'all talk about the Daily Kos black people got hoodwinked by Russia thing?
I will talk about that
out?
tomorrow on my show, but I did see that apparently the Daily Kos, the Russians had this incredible strategy, and what they did was, it's amazing. It goes back to the Gold Coast of Africa, and they created this horrific human chattel and slavery system where they went to Africa, they ripped people out of their homes, they sold them into human bondage, and then they brought them to the American South, which they actually were secretly running at the time. They instituted a slavery system of mass terrorism and slavery, and then they instituted, of course, after Reconstruction, apartheid, redlining, systemic police killings and abuse, voter discrimination, and every type of, even down to just actually basic cognitive bias that you can measure on a test, as an example. And they did this all in preparation so that apparently black YouTubers would note that they didn't like that Hillary Clinton called them super predators, and then boom, Donald Trump will be president. I mean, the one thing you have to say about Russians is they think very strategically, and this is a part of at least a 500-year plan. Yes.
Yeah. I think I called back. I called in 2 months ago, maybe a month ago, and we talked for a second about Russia. And you obviously, and it's a good point, is that it's probably just an organized crime scheme. But I think I might have called it a little bit that they're going to slowly start rolling out these really either offensive or stupid calls out about memes and Facebook ads that this explains how Trump won the election. Is that a bunch of black people did all this, and I think it's gonna slowly keep rolling. And Joy Reid, who is a marginal figure as far as things go, is gonna keep perpetuating stuff like this. And honestly, Jimmy Dore is gonna start perpetuating things like this, because it's the best example of how he can.
You mean in terms of people sounding stupid on the? Yeah, I mean, I think that's true, and I think that it's very
I think he's also it's his way to get out from underneath the rock of, I did talk a lot of crap and say you should just vote green. Here's a way to do it. I'm going to say, look at all these terrible people who fell for Russian ads or whatever. It seems like
I don't think
I
don't think that's what he'll do at all. I don't think that's his play. I mean, his play is to just double down. But whatever. I mean, regardless of what all these personalities do, I mean, I think that. I mean, we talked about it on both shows. The notion, that Hillary Clinton is not even coming out and saying, hey, I think Russia did some stuff and whatever. But I'm much more concerned, particularly as somebody who got such an overwhelming share of the vote of people of color, that there's a systemic campaign of voter disenfranchisement in this country, and that it's funded by right-wing plutocrats.
She's supposed to be the vast right-wing conspiracy person, and it's now the vast Russia conspiracy.
Right.
That's really annoying.
It's incredibly annoying. And I also just I have no doubt that there are obviously some people out there who, and some of them, unfortunately, they went down a rabbit hole after they supported Bernie. I think it's a very small group of people. It's nowhere near analogous to the type of people on the right. And then there's also tons of people in like the dumb center. People are going through different rabbit holes. And, there might have been some, Russia funding for some crap that people fell into. I'm a little bit more concerned about the Koch brothers funding of decades long of propaganda and voter suppression to, profoundly hollow out, dumb down this country. That's the structural issue. I think that the Russia stuff is relevant if it hurts Trump's brand, and it's relevant because, again, I think there probably is some very specific things there. But it's very clear that a lot of people who only want to talk about Russia, it clearly is that kind of centrist proxy for not wanting to deal with really anything else.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
It's
and
like
it's embarrassing.
Klobuchar's bill about Facebook ads. Like, we need to know transparency of where they're coming from. Well, then what if it just came from another proxy Russia state so that it doesn't say Russia on it? People wouldn't care anyway.
Well, I don't know. See, I don't know about that. Like, it could be a dumb motivation, but we do need to know where Facebook ads come from, and that would have a lot more to do with exposing people like the Mercers than Russia, in my view. So we actually do need to do things
maybe
like that.
The best way to, that's the best way to view it, though. It just seems like they're very focused on the Russia aspect of it, and they're going to get real. I'm sure it's going to be a way that they're going to work around that law to make it just be the same as it was before. They should just focus better on, like, why isn't it a voting rights law that they're pushing forth? Why does it have to be this specific thing?
I agree with you 100%. And I also would say, too, that, like, I have no problem. I'm not, like, again, I'm not a Russia idealizer or excuser or whatever, but, like, that sanctions package, like, putting new sanctions on Russia is not remotely as important as preserving the Iran deal. And Bernie Sanders was the only person who voted the right way on that. I appreciate the call, man. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Have a good one.
You too. You're calling from an 845 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Holy shit, it's me. It's Mark Benjamin.
Hey, what's up, man?
Been a fan of your show for a while.
Thanks.
Let me just do a bit of unpacking. One, would you have an interview with Jordan of Peterson, the man, the legend, the
maybe
one
on my
that
show.
People in the
maybe on my show.
That's great.
Maybe. I mean, the whole thing is really crazy. I've just started to do a Jordan Peterson impression because I finally had to research this guy, and he's basically like this. He's like this Canadian professor who actually is a psychologist. And sometimes he'll do some like kind of interesting spiel about Jung or somebody, but he's like very he basically like doesn't like trans people. And like that, I mean, honestly, like that's like the simplest thing that I could kind of boil down everything to. And there's apparently
kind of, but not really. He does. It's not even he doesn't like trans people. He doesn't like the people speaking for trans people. It's like
whatever. He doesn't like trans. He doesn't like trans. He doesn't like.
I speak for you.
He doesn't like trans people. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry.
We'll just go with that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with that. But just so everybody knows, I think a lot of people haven't been exposed to him yet. He's there was a speech. There was basically some rule in Canada that I have to look up more, which essentially boiled down to like, if you're a state worker, which I believe he is at a state university, and somebody in your class wants to be referred to by how they identify in terms of a gender category, you have to respect that. And his whole response was, instead of like, even let's be really generous to him. Even if he wanted to say, I don't believe in that and whatever, blah, 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 he could even just use the person's name. But instead, he had to go on a whole melodramatic, like, I am not going to be mandated. And he actually literally talks like that. Okay, It's PC authoritarianism. And the whole thing is crazy. There's these different identities like Zed and Fred. And when I first came into college, you could tell an assistant teacher that she had a nice dynamite rack. And you can't even do it anymore. I mean, the whole thing is crazy. And so he's built a big following, as you can imagine, because this is like the easiest fucking... I mean, I just need to open up a YouTube channel tomorrow and be like, feminists are out of control. And I mean, there's people who have penises, but then they say they have vaginas. I mean, the whole thing is crazy, and Muslims are ruining everything. But I'm homophobic, but I'll protect them from the gays. And then Sam Harris will book me, and I'll have 1 million followers.
It's in the law rather than like what's it called that the penalty for kind of using the more not so used terms. Like he doesn't mind from what I listen to a lot of him. From the way he explains it, he doesn't mind going through your circumstance is is this, okay, I'll respond in this way. It's more like he's more pissed that it's in the like
as a single person, he said that somebody could go to jail. If I understand correctly, he's implied that people get like heavily fined or go to jail if they don't do that. I think that's my understanding of what he said. Has anybody in Canada faced any type of punishment for the type of thing he's talking about at all?
It's like that's what he's worried about.
So, okay, so that...
worry than anything.
All right, so I'm just going to say that in the most generous scenario to Jordan Peterson, and I've also seen him say other dumb stuff about like Donald Trump and stuff, the most generous scenario to Jordan Peterson, which is still a relatively transphobic one in my opinion, he is obsessively worried about something that is like... If you're a normal, functioning human being thinking about the world as it is, from climate to healthcare to the Middle East to Africa to inequality to how we manage or not manage capitalism, if this thing that he's worried about is like not on, I don't know, the bottom 560,000 of your list of issues, it's a little weird.
Well, he is in college, and there's a lot of stupid people in college, even though there's a lot of smart people.
I go on fucking dude. I don't. If my super in my building implements a new like they change where we take out the garbage and it annoys me. Maybe it even annoys me so much that I mention it to him. Am I going to build a whole YouTube channel on like the whole thing is crazy? It used to be the park.
It's actually an educational thing. That's just a side. It's just basically on the side where he gets money.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
My other question is, it's more on the what's it called, on different channels. Have you ever heard of Rogue Money X22?
No.
For basically things on the economy and geopolitical, not the domestic stuff, just the geopolitical situation and the what's it called, the stuff happening in China and Russia, and basically how they're trying to get wealth and how the American dollar slowly dying a sad, pitiful death. And I haven't learned economy, so I'm just going to... So I listen to a lot of people, even between left, right, center, to try to get a gauge until I'm able to...
The whole thing is crazy. The whole thing is crazy. I don't exactly understand the question.
Okay, part one. Have you seen
let's just do.
Report?
No, I haven't seen
any.
I haven't seen any of this stuff. No, I haven't. No.
All right. I think you would like it, even though you don't. I don't think you would agree exactly with their politics. I think you would actually like. Well, it's kind of some of it's kind of funny. I think you would like to. I think you someone like you that likes reading and going through things. I think you would like to listen to their podcast.
All right, boss. Well, send me a link on Twitter. And I'll do more Jordan Peterson impressions on my show. I promise.
Oh, yes. That's going to be great.
I don't like trans people. In 1985, I had a teaching assistant. I said, oh, my God, that's a dynamite ass you have. And now I wouldn't be able to say that anymore in my classroom. It's a PC authoritarian movement, and the whole thing is crazy.
I'm still a fan of his, but I love your impression.
All right. Thanks, brother. God, there's something about, like, aging college professors.
You'd think you might have better methods for dealing with dumb kids if you're a college professor.
Yeah, you might, or you'd actually, yeah, exactly. I don't even, whatever. You raising your hand? No, I'm stretching. Oh, you're stretching.
I was stretching.
Long stretch.
It's just such an interesting hill to die on.
And it's also like, that's why I say he's almost certainly transphobic, because the only emotional investment that could get somebody to spend such an inordinate amount of time in such an impractical effect trivial issue has to be that you have a problem with the category of people that the thing is designed to protect. And then you can build a whole fucking melodramatic, like, it's a PC authoritarianism and kids have T-shirts and soon there'll be a cultural revolution and there'll be a Maoist Canadian student, but she won't even be a hot young Chinese one. She'll be a fat Canadian one and she'll be forcing me to renounce all of my teaching. And the whole thing is crazy. Yes, I will go on Joe Rogan again.
My position is, if people start, if like once the 10th person is gulagged for, using the wrong pronoun,
yes,
then I'll start to, think Peterson has something
we're
to talk
the bourgeois part of the party committee, so
right,
we're more
exactly.
understanding.
Yeah.
But I'm a little bit, I would say once the 40th person has been put into a gulag, then maybe we can negotiate. But I might still have to order a crackdown. You're calling from a 509 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, man, this is Ronald Reagan.
Hey, Ronald Reagan. It's great to hear from you.
Thank you. It's great to call. Once I did this once before. I'd like to read a Amazon review of Fubar, Sam Seder's book.
Okay, please.
This is submitted by Kristen in February of 2013. Conservatives have a stereotype of liberal talking heads, smug, supercilious, and conceited. If you gave conservatives the opportunity to describe their stereotype liberal to a composite artist, the resulting sketch would be Sam Seder. There's a couple hard-hitting paragraphs, and I'm going to skip to the bottom.
Yeah.
Overall, this book is unfunny, uninformative, and unhelpful all at once. If this was a standard sample of the quality of programming on Air America when it was running, I, for one, can understand why it eventually folded. Progressive-minded people will need better material than this to challenge the lies and fear-mongering of the far right. Yikes.
It's a pretty good review.
I also wanted to check to see if you have... Yikes.
Yes.
I wanted to check to see if you have a favorite border wall prototype.
No, I don't actually. Tell me.
I mean, there's 8 right now. I really like the Texas Sterling Construction Company prototype because it's got metal spikes on the top that would impale people climbing over it. The problem is it's not see-through, and
right. We all know what happens then.
You have to have, otherwise there's no way to know what's going on the other side of the wall. And when the drug cartels catapult drugs over the wall, people get totally blindsided. So it feels like with the samples I'm
totally
seeing so far,
yes,
there's pluses and minuses for each one, but I'm not really finding that one that's like really my dream wall. Because some of the see-through ones, it's like there's nothing to impale climbers on the top, but it is see-through.
Right.
So, I don't know.
Well, I guess theoretically, if you was see-through and you saw somebody climbing, you could immediately dispatch an agent to get on the top of the wall and kind of shoot them down with a power rifle.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about that. But
but then you have to pay for an agent, and
But isn't that like the only thing that we want to use federal money for? To like put a bunch of like thugs on the border,
a class of border agents.
Yeah, a class of like border thugs to like kill. Well, you know what I love is, and I know that like, and
it's actually cheaper. It's actually cheaper to hire them on the Mexican side, and there's less laws
then they
and
would
regulations.
Be Mexican, but then they would be Mexican.
It's just a good idea.
Could we trust him though?
Could we trust him? But you know what I love? I just have to say, like, I study cartels to some extent, and like El Chapo was like famous for building these like incredibly ornate tunnel systems that actually went underneath the border and went really deep at times in the United States. You had cartels in Colombia that actually had like functioning small-scale submarines. And there's just something amazing about like these almost like private military / global corporations are just like, you know what, catapult.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully someone on the other side picks this up. Oh shit, we killed someone.
Yeah, oh fuck! I fucking beamed another gringo. That's lost product, man.
Well, the thing I mean, this is how you get drugs across. You pay a border patrol agent, $15,000 in cash, and then you find out when he's working, and you drive through in a
There's
truck.
the simple
That's
one.
how drugs come in.
Right.
So, real quick, there's a guy named Reuben Anderson. He wrote a book called Illegality Incorporated, and it's a great book on sort of like the Illegality Inc. It's like deportation industrial complex, and he writes about border walls in Europe and how they've been, even like on smaller scales, like in Spain, there's some places where they've got these border walls that are very technical and they just don't work. So he'd be a good guest. And last but not least, friend of the show, Brian Kilmeade, his book on Andrew Jackson is out in hardcover.
We're trying to book him.
I would love to book Brian Kilmeade. Oh my God, him and Gorka are like my two dream guests.
I just love the idea that he wrote a book. Like
that he wrote. This is like his multiple books at this point.
The whole Kilmeade shelf.
There's a Kilmeade shelf for your study.
Yeah. Anyway, so Andrew Jackson. I did the synopsis is also like super racist and pretty good. So
yeah, I would imagine.
Everybody should check it out. Have a good one.
Thanks, boss.
Ooh,
right,
Eric
guys.
Prince blurbed this Kilmeade book. The reader gets an inkling of the grit that made America great.
Wow. That's really cool.
Please hire us to kill people.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Now can you send us overseas to murder Arabs? Thank you. You're calling from a 734 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm Tom from Chicago.
Hey, Tom. What's going on?
Have you heard of Refuse Fascism and the protest that they're planning for November 4th?
No.
They're indefinite protests with the goal of removing Trump and Pence from office.
Cool.
Just nationwide?
Nationwide, they have protests planned in, I think, at least 14 cities.
No, I don't know the organization. I think I've seen
the hashtag,
but I don't know. And it might actually be a group. So I'm always wanting to, like, before I kind of co-sign on a specific action, I want to know who's putting it together and what their deal is. But in general, the more civil opposition and people out in the streets, I think, the better. I think that's a good thing.
All right, great.
Thanks for the call, man.
Yeah, check it out. And, if it's something that you like, then it would be great if you, talked about them on air or had a guest on your show.
I'll check it out. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Okay.
All right, guys, 3 more quick calls. I'm sorry I can't get to all of you. I can take 3 more, and then we got to go. And the IMs, I think, I don't think I'm doing anything wrong here. I think it might be that they're finally done. You're calling from a 215 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, yeah, this is Jefferson Beauregard secession stuff.
Yes, sir.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How you doing?
I'm quite upset. I don't know if you saw me at Congress having to respond and defend my honor
to
from these goddamn Yankees.
Goddamn Yankees.
But
Franken.
Yes, and from those that shall not be named. But anyway,
right.
The unfortunate incident of this Green Beret, I'm just saying, bring some light to what the wonderful Strom Thurmond warned us about integration. I just want to bring that forward for everyone's consideration. However, I need to talk to all of my Confederates, if you will, in Ohio.
We have about 20 seconds, though. So
and Wisconsin.
Yes.
The poll tax lives. Voter suppression. The poll tax lives. Voter suppression.
I don't think we're that far from it. Thank you for the call, man. That's really creepy. I don't think we're really that far from
No,
that
I
at
mean,
all.
you could literally like tot up how much it costs to go to the DMV or do whatever
yeah.
measures you need to
It's
jump
an
in.
indirect poll tax.
Yeah, you can
No
you can
doubt.
calculate that.
No doubt. You're calling from a 610 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Michael.
Yes.
It's Michael from Pennsylvania. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
Good. I just wanted to ask if you guys had any intent of covering the interesting developments in New Zealand. I know it might be a little obscure, but Jacinda Ardern, the 37-year-old leader of the Labour Party, becoming prime minister out of surprise.
And her saying that capitalism has been a failure. She said that yesterday, I believe. Yeah, I mean, I have hesitated from covering it, to be honest, because I'm not really sold on her yet. But I that's an interesting statement. I mean, and then it's also just finding my angle. You know what I mean? Like something like Syriza or Corbyn. Yeah, go ahead.
There's one interesting, I don't know enough about New Zealand politics. I just usually try to keep track of what's going on.
Yeah, you're fucking right. You don't know enough about New Zealand politics, and I'll smack you to fuck around. You understand? Anytime, anywhere, any place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't know about American politics either, Mike. Maybe you should keep your fucking mouth shut and your eyes ahead of you.
You know what, Mike? You know what? Keep talking shit. I might come over to Brooklyn, slap you around.
Oh, yeah, no. Anytime,
Anyway.
you name a place. Anytime, anywhere, any place. I mean, you're on the roof of the fucking Bell Tower. I'll smack you right in the fucking lips. All right.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
But what's weird is they formed this coalition with the Green Party, which seems normal, but New Zealand First as well. So it's...
Is that the nationalists, I assume?
Yeah.
So the right-wing party is the Nationalist Party.
Yep.
And then there's this, obviously anti-immigrant party, New Zealand First, which has this kind of weird, I don't know, maybe you'd say fascist in the sense of, National Socialist platform where they want to give, robust social welfare to New Zealanders, but they want to close the border type situation. So it's this weird coalition. I think, it's problematic, but
yeah, of course,
it might be worth investigating, getting an expert on New Zealand politics to talk about.
Yeah, I'll look into that, man. That's interesting.
All right, brother. You have a good one.
Thank you, brother. That's a really good idea. Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, bye.
All right, final call of the day. Sorry I can't get to everybody else. You're calling from an 847 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, Michael. It's Josh from Chicago.
Hello,
Denver.
Josh. Josh from Chicago and Denver. Traveling young man.
Yes.
How are you,
and
Joshy? What's going on?
I just want to let Jefferson Beauregard Sessions know that his face is plastered on every dispensary.
Oh, that's awesome.
Denver.
That's awesome. You're always calling with ambient sound. You never are in a place and just calling. There's always traffic and other things going on.
You know why? Because I'm more interesting, Michael. That's why.
Ooh, shot across the bow against the other listeners.
I was just curious, actually, what your thoughts are on the CON,
on the
New York
what?
convention. So, do you think we should have a state convention in New York?
I can't comment on that. I just don't know enough.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah.
Reactions are all over the board about that. But anyways, yep.
I need to get more
tell
on
Jefferson that his face.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate the call.
All right, bye.
Bye. I mean, the whole thing is crazy, I remember in 1991, I told this teaching assistant, TA, I said, oh my God, it looks like you can F. And that was just normal. And now you can go to jail for 50 years for saying that because of the PC authoritarian culture.
Your accent is like if Ireland colonized Canada.
Or if the Shire were in Canada.
Fuck you both. There's a certain urgent whininess to it that I can't capture exactly, but it's what it is that he's actually really having anxiety while he talks about this stuff.
You should.
Yeah, right. I will say that for that whole crop of people, he's infinitely more interesting than any of his cohort. Like he might have
because he's read some textbooks.
Because he's
basically.
he's read some books. He has a few. He's like he might have some other areas where he's got something to say. And he doesn't, and at least, you know, the urgent neurosis doesn't sound like some type of like pre-programmed like trust fund anti-Muslim robot like Sam Harris, you know, like, I will be the most prominent intellectual in the world. I will prove to mommy that all of the Golden Girls money was well spent.
Even if I do it
waking up
by merely reading the minds of billions of people.
I'm going to read a poll plus psychokinetic states plus strong dislike of Muslims, plus knockoff reading of sophomore year philosophy. I'm the most prominent thinker in the world. Am I okay now, Mom? All right, everybody. There's no IM, so there's no fanfare. We'll figure that out. I want to thank all of you. Tomorrow, Sam's back. Everybody's here. Jamie's here. Missed her today. Everybody's going to be, we're going to be in full force in studio tomorrow, 7 p.m. with my show, Michael Brooks Show. Thanks, everybody. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and